Welcome to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. We interview remarkable and thought-provoking guests about innovation, leadership, and change in the world of business. Whether you're an executive or an entrepreneur, our objective is to help you and your organisation create an entrepreneurial culture, become more innovative, and better able to respond to change. Each week, we'll deconstruct world-class performance from the arenas of business, academia, science, and sports. Each week, you can expect key insights, fresh perspectives, and proven tools you can use straight away to make you more successful professionally and personally. With your hosts, Mark Bidwell and Roddy Miller.
I'm really pleased to welcome onto the show Emmanuel Gobillot, who I worked with at the Hay Group, and who now advises CEOs of some of the world's most well-known and admired companies. He brings a fresh perspective to the topic of leadership and has got a very down-to-earth style that cuts through the noise and focuses on the real issues associated with being a leader in the 21st century. He's a clear thinker who doesn't overcomplicate things, and he peppers the conversation with some nice expressions and historical references from his French homeland. I hope you enjoy the show.
So welcome to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. Today's guest is Emmanuel Gobillot, who has been described as the first leadership guru for the digital generation. He's the author of 3 best-selling books on leadership, with another one being published later this year called Disciplined Collaboration. He's worked with organizations like AstraZeneca, Google, the United Nations, and Zurich Financial Services, and is a sought-after speaker on leadership. So welcome to the show, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, not at all. So, Emmanuel, I'm curious. There have been lots of books written about leadership over the years, and I think I counted 30,000 books on leadership on Amazon. And I'm curious, what made you confident that you could add to this body of knowledge when you started to write your first book 10, 12 years ago?
It's about 10, coming up to 10 years ago. I think, 10. You know, that's a good question, and it's one I was asking myself when I was writing it. And I guess, you know, there are some enduring truth in leadership. And many of the books that you can read actually are all around similar themes and coming up with similar truth. I think there was 2 things I was aiming to do with the first one. Was to update the language of leadership. There has been a lot of developments in terms of technology. There's been a lot of changes in the way organizations are run. And I think some of our language around leadership was somewhat outdated. And I wanted to test out whether the concepts of leadership out there were still relevant in that way. The other driver for me was that leadership has always been, and most of the books are, on an individual pursuit. So it's very much around what do great leaders do? How do leaders behave? How do leaders make things happen? But actually what I wanted to do was to try to understand leadership in context. So actually, how do organizations impact leaders as well as leaders impacting organizations? How does leadership change depending on the context you find yourself in? How do you impact the organization? Is that always the same? So there was a lot of things that I wanted to bring out in the first book. And I guess, you know, I never pretended and never pretend in any of my books to come up with a new scientific formula for leadership that will solve all the world's problem. What I want to do is I want to invite conversations. So I see my books as ideas that I put out and that hopefully people discuss and challenges their thinking. Rather than the final say on leadership, because I think, you know, there has been a lot that has been said in the past, and there will probably be even more said in the future.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think, you know, there are some very fresh themes in your books, and I think one of them that resonated with me in the first book, The Connected Leader. I mean, you talk about this paradox of leadership, which is about remaining present in the moment. And again, you wrote this 10 years ago, so it was quite prescient, because this is a really important topic today. But remaining present, but also being able to see the emerging context and remaining connected with what's emerging. Yeah. And that dilemma, that paradox is, if it was true 10 years ago, is even more true today, given the pace of change and, of course, the amount of demands on our attention that come at us all the time. So, I mean, how does a leader do this? How do they manage this paradox?
Well, the reality is most leaders manage it by moving on. And I think, you know, if you think about leadership careers, they tend to be about 4 or 5 years long. You come up full of energy and full of ideas. You understand the context you find yourself in. You do what you need to do. And then hopefully you move before the context changes so much that you become irrelevant. And I think that's the sad truth of the way it is currently managed. And it has been true. And that's really what drove me to write The Connected Leader, was a simple truth, which is if I look at leaders throughout history, most of them, even the greatest one, always eventually fail. And there comes a point, and I start the book with Churchill. Here is somebody who took a country to victory, and the country thanked him by firing him. And that somehow didn't seem so right to me. And incidentally, we did the same with de Gaulle in France and so on. So, it's not a Churchill issue. But I think this idea of being able to see context change is indeed even more critical today, because context changes faster. But what it forced me to look at, and this is why I mentioned earlier this idea of the organization impacting the leader as well as the leader impacting the organization. What it says to me is that actually our picture of the leader as a hero is misconstrued. I mean, we have an issue when we rely on one individual, and actually for leaders, the success comes from being able to get their followers to inform them about context change as they see it happen. Unfortunately, the demands that we are under mean that we more and more take a view that we should be delivering as individuals, rather than pay attention to the people around us and what it is that they say. But I think that's the difficult juggling act of a leader, which is able to energize your followers whilst listening to them at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that's a theme that you talk about in a later book, which we'll come back to in a minute. But just coming back to this point, the reality is most leaders move on, but of course not all of them do. There are some outstanding leaders that remain in place. I mean, arguably fewer than before. What are they doing? I mean, are they evolving with the same rhythm that the markets are evolving, or are they just lucky? I mean, what makes the difference between someone who either gets fired or moves on before the context changed too much versus someone who actually is able to remain in place and continue to lead the organization?
Well, I think, you mentioned luck, and I think we do underestimate the impact of luck. So I think some people are lucky. I think that's true. I think you also make your own luck, and you make your own luck through the networks you maintain. So actually, I think the success or the leaders who remain successful do what I call have the ability to work in as well as on the business. Mm-hmm. So they have an ability to dive down into the details as well as listen to what is going on and observe what is going on. It's a bit like, when you're flying, it's great to fly at 39,000 feet because you can see far away and it's pretty smooth. It's great when you come to land at 2,000 feet because you can see exactly what's going on. The trouble is when you fly at 20,000 feet because that's where it's turbulent and you keep on moving about. Now, having the ability to go up to 39 and down to 2 and back up again, I think is what differentiates many of the leaders who survive context change, is they can see it coming. And they do that through their network, through listening, through being curious and remaining curious and challenges their own thinking, whilst at the same time being able to dive down and energize their organization around the things that need to be done. But going up and down like this constantly is quite difficult to do. And some leaders would rather remain up or remain down. And that's where it becomes difficult.
Yeah. Okay, so you work across a wide range of industries, right? And so coming at the subject from a different angle, I mean, how do you see leadership changing or varying across companies like, tech companies like Google, for instance, where, which are evolving very quickly, growing very quickly at the forefront of their industry, versus perhaps some more mature, regulated, long product life cycle industries, for instance, in insurance or in pharmaceuticals? I mean, do you see any big differences in terms of what outstanding leadership looks like, or even what average leadership looks like in those two extreme environments? And clearly you don't need to get into the specifics of the companies you worked for, but just as an example.
Well, I think that the first thing to say is, from an organizational point of view, each of them wishes they had more of what the other one had. So if you're an organization going through a lot of growth and you're at a startup stage, you're growing your organization, you wish you had more of the more of the structures that others have, more of the predictability and processes that those structures bring. If you're in a highly regulated environment, you wish you could recapture some of the energy that you had at the growth stage. So I think there's that happens rather a lot. I think from a leadership point of view, I mean, interestingly, great leadership always looks fairly similar. I think that's one of the things that you realize is actually some of the great leaders I meet have the ability to operate in multiple contexts. And again, I think that also is why, some of the people who start organizations are not always the ones who get them to grow. Some of the people who who manage to maintain organizations are not always the ones who can grow a new one, and so on. But actually, when you get great leaders, I think they have that ability to work across spectrum. This is the question most people ask me when they know what I do is, well, what is it that great leaders do? What's the secret formula? And I think, it's not so secret. It's about how do I make the people around me stronger and more capable? And actually, you can look at great leaders in any industry. The reason why people call them great is because at some stage they make people stronger and more capable. And that's applicable across industries, irrespective of the context. Now, that's not to say that any great leader in place A can become a great leader in place B. There's some fundamentals that you need to have. You need to understand the playing field and so on. But I think there is a theme for me, which is around that ability to make other people feel stronger and more capable in the context they find themselves in. And to get their discretionary effort, to get them to give you everything that they have. And that, you tend to find that in many industries.
And that's a constant, I guess, that hasn't changed over the time that you've been doing this kind of work.
No, and I think it hasn't changed. I mean, you were talking about all the literature on leadership. I think that's a constant you can find through most of the leadership that people call it differently, but actually it's fundamentally the same idea, which is this idea of, how do I get people to be the best they can be, by challenging them, by pushing them, by helping them to see a better version of themselves, which is a constant in most organizations that I deal with. I mean, I think, again, then you're back to different challenges that are going to derail that effort. And I think, if you're in a fast-paced organization, fairly new, growing, then the context will always try to push you to be more driven by a sense of achievement, doing it yourself because you don't necessarily have the resources or the time. In some more regulated industry, you might be able to delegate things to other people that you couldn't. So you will be helped or hindered on that journey. But actually, the fundamental of making people stronger and more capable remains the same.
Yeah. Now you took this fundamental and you kind of turned it around or put a spin on it in your book, Follow the Leader, right? Where you actually talked it's not so much what great leaders do, but it's more about what great followers want, which is nice because it turns it around and it gives a different perspective. So what's the answer to that question? What do great followers want?
Well, it all started with the realization that if you looked and measured leadership from a point of view of results, from a point of view of feedback, whatever dimension you wanted to look at. So I've made great leaders who were loud, visionary. I've made great leaders who were very quiet. I've made great leaders who did a lot of stuff. I made great leaders who stepped back. And they were all great leaders. So it always seemed to me that in search of great leadership, we are always pushed to look for average. So what is it that they have in common? Well, actually, the thing that nobody ever mentioned is at some stage, they have followers. So they have people who have made the decision to give up some of their freedom to act in order to have a better life. So what was it that those people were looking for? So then I did a piece of research trying to find the answer. And the only answer that came back over and over again was charisma. And people said, well, I follow that person because they have charisma. And that didn't seem to make sense again, because those people behave so differently that my question was, well, they can't all have charisma because otherwise everything falls into that bucket. So I tried to unpack the idea of charisma in the book and said, well, actually, what is it that we want? And fundamentally, it falls on the three headings. The thing that we tend to look for in our leaders is people who share our values. The Americans always say, I could have a beer with that person. Somebody I can relate to, somebody who I know can relate to me. And that's the idea of compassion I don't like. I know a lot of people talk about empathy. I think empathy is not that useful a concept. Empathy means, I know how you feel, and I can relate to how you feel. The trouble with that is I can also manipulate the way you feel. I like to talk about compassion, because compassion is about, I understand the way you feel and I feel driven to change it for your own sake, for your own good. So I want to make you the person you want to be. So there's one idea which is about, do they share my values? Do they understand me? Do they give me hope in the future? That's number one. The other thing we look for is, do they mean what they say? Actually, it's one thing to give me hope and to tell me stuff, but actually, are you real? This sense of integrity around, is what you think, what you say, what you do aligned, or are you trying to manipulate me in some way? So that's the second one. And then the last one is, can they actually deliver?
Yep.
Now, all of these things go on in our head. I call it emotional logic, because our decision to follow is neither logical and rational, nor purely emotional and irrational. It's kind of a weird thing that goes on in our brain, and it just feels right. And what feels right is when those three conditions are aligned, and suddenly we think, well, okay, that person is going to be able to deliver. So in a way, if you had to then say, well, what's the lesson for leaders? I guess the lesson is, be who you are, but a skillful version of you. So give me more of you and a more skillful version of you. Understand me. So I always say to leaders, the trouble with leadership is, it really isn't about you, but at the same time, it's all about you. So actually, great leaders understand that leadership is about followers. It's about getting followers to release their effort, and they will only release it if you are the right version of you. And that's about being open, being honest, being practiced at what you do, and understanding what is it that your followers want. And I think, if there's anything out of the book that people should remember, so I'll save all your listeners the trouble of reading it all. I stop after chapter 2, I think it is, or 3, but it's about this idea of compassion. I mean, fundamentally, do you know what it is that's going on for the people around you? And are you prepared to change that for them? Are you prepared to help them be the best they can be?
And that's a very, very different model from, perhaps the command and control model that characterizes a lot of the literature up until quite recently.
I think it is. And for one, but you see, I'm not surprised that command and control has stayed around for so long. If you think about organizations are pretty much one of the only place in human life where followers don't choose leaders. It is actually leaders who choose leaders. So it's the people at the top who are going to appoint people and say, you are now a leader. Now, if you think about political life where you live or where I live, it's the other way around. We decide who we're going to cast our vote for. Now, the problem with leaders choosing leaders is it makes you somehow as a leader feel secure in the knowledge that you can lead. But that's not actually true. Whilst people have to give you their effort, nobody can coerce someone to give you their discretionary effort. And I think, the real skill of leadership is not just to get people to do what you tell them to do, is for them to do everything they can do, which might well be more, and in most cases is more than what you tell them to do. So, command and control is reassuring, and it will give you effort. But what it won't give you is that extra effort, which we all identify in the great leaders that you mentioned at the start, when you say, well, look, some leaders manage to succeed over time. And I think the reason they succeed is because they manage to release that discretionary effort. They manage to get more out of their people. That's simply the effort that they contract with them to give.
Yeah. I work with, and I'm involved with a number of companies that are really that are more characterized by the sort of industrial, long product life cycle, regulated industries, which are beginning to feel under enormous strain because the R&D pipelines aren't working as well as they used to. There are new entrants coming in. They've got, which with the threat of disruption. I mean, I'm curious, how are companies that you're familiar with dealing with the the challenges, the need to innovate and the need to build cultures of sustainable innovation, but at the same time manage the business and deliver the quarterly numbers? I mean, how does that tension get, or that dilemma get managed in some of the organizations you work with?
Well, that's the big challenge. I always joke to say one of the calls that I get the most is when senior leaders call me and say, well, our divisions aren't working very well with each other. At which stage I need to point out to them the word division is exactly what it means. So don't be surprised that you get what you set out for. The challenge for most organizations, to my mind, is this. You cannot re-engineer the organization. So part of the challenge, there's been a wave in time to say, well, actually, it's our structure that's not helping. Now, the problem with that view is actually the structure ensures the delivery of the business today. So if you start messing up with the structure, you run the risk of destroying what you've got. So that's not really the solution. Now, the other solution that comes in is people say, oh, well, we just need to get people on an away day with each other. And if they talk to each other a bit more and we'll stick a dotted line in between and say, chat with each other, we'll get somewhere. Now, that's not true either, because people don't have the playing field to make it work. So I think the challenge is really about and back to my field of leadership, the challenge is about how do you create the conditions for people to understand what it is that you're after, the latitude that they have, and then are then able to direct their effort in a different way. Now, it's a difficult mindset to have, but it's fundamentally about change management. It's about how do I make people understand that we have to retain what it is that makes us of value, but actually search for the next wave of value. The ways in which at an individual level you can establish some of that is to go back to levels of trust, understanding why people lose trust, and most of that has done with value and where does my value lie. It's about establishing a purpose for the organization that is broader than just do what it is that you targeted to do, and it's about trying to have a new form of conversations amongst people within the organization. I mean, if you think about established organization, most conversations have become problem-driven conversation.
Yep.
So they're about, here is an issue, we need to solve that issue. Now, if that's your mindset, that everything is looked at through a problem mindset. If you take any MBA class anywhere in the world and you give them a case study of an organization and you say, okay, go away and come back in an hour and tell me about the organization, they will have done some kind of analysis, SWOT, PEST, whatever it might be. Yeah. And they'll tell you the problems of that organization and how those problems are going to be solved, because that's very much the executive mindset. Now, my view is the conversation that you need to have to start somewhere else, and they have to start with, what is it that has made us great? So actually, when everything is working, when we are at our best, what is it that we do? Because actually, we don't understand that. We don't spend much time thinking about it. We celebrate success, but we don't unpack success the way we unpack problems. So if you think from, okay, let's discover that what it is that makes us great, then we can start to think about how do we have more of that? And what would be the implications of operating at that level all the time? Now, sometimes it might not be possible. People might turn around and say, well, when we were really great, we were working 24/7. We haven't got the resources to do that, blah, blah, blah. So then you start to investigate what it is that makes you good. And in so doing, you tend to reconnect with what used to happen in your organization. I have a phrase I use a lot, which is saying, most organizations start as a purpose in search of assets. So you have an idea, you have a view, you have something, you want to change the world, whatever it might be, you have a purpose and you're looking for assets to grow. At some stage in your evolution, most organizations flip. They become a great big asset in search of a purpose because everybody has forgotten what it is that they were trying to do in the first place. So the challenge is to have new conversation that reconnect you to that purpose. And if you do that, actually the boundaries and the divisions kind of fall apart in exactly the same way as they did when you were a startup, because you've been involved with enough startups to know that actually anybody will do anything at any time in order to get the stuff done, whether it's within their accountability or not. And if you reconnect to that sense of purpose and energy, then you have a chance to actually get over the new entrants and the disruptors and all the rest of it. But it requires courage on the part of leaders, which is why, and jumping into your field of expertise, which is why, to me, you're much more likely to find entrepreneurs at lower levels of the organization rather than more senior levels. In France, we have a saying. We say it's never the kings who start the revolutions. And when you're sitting at the top and there's a lot of things that could go wrong, it's very hard to disrupt. But actually within the organization, once you've given latitude for people to operate and you've given them the boundaries to say, well, that's the game we play, then actually people will be more than willing to challenge the status quo and to actually cooperate and collaborate with other people to make things happen.
Yeah, and I guess if you've got a very clearly defined purpose that has attracted people into the organization in the first place, this North Star, these conversations become much easier as well, because everything that entrepreneurs doing is actually in support of that purpose.
Yes, and I think, you know, we forget our humanity when we work in business, because we're surrounded with processes and so we become part of a process. But actually we forget at our peril that we are human beings with a brain and a body and emotions and sense and all of these things are messy, but they're also of value. And I think if you can reconnect to that sense of purpose, then actually people start thinking differently. You know, it's the same as saying, well, okay, I work for a huge pharmaceutical. That will speak to a different part of your brain than to say, I work for, you know, one of the biggest biggest enemy of everything that goes wrong in the world. I mean, it may be the same thing,
but it's a different energy. Yeah,
part of your brain. It's a different energy.
So just going back to that point you raised about the intrapreneurs, so people further down the organization. I mean, what advice would you give to those kinds of individuals who might have aspirations to enter leadership roles longer term in their career?
Now, you have to understand, I guess, a life lesson. Maybe I've just grown old, I don't know. But you have to understand, I guess, that in a fight between you and the system always tends to win at the end. So I think once you understand that, then it enables you to operate differently. And I guess what I mean by that is you have to be able to challenge without being rejected. And that's the hardest thing in especially a large established organization, is how can I challenge the system without the system rejecting me? Yeah. Now, you know, you will have seen that, and your listeners will have seen that, I'm sure, in organizations where somebody comes from outside the organization and they spend their first few months telling you everything that's wrong. And they normally say things like, well, in my last organization, we didn't do it that way. At which point your brain is just thinking, well, why did you come here? Yeah. So you always have a tendency to reject challenge. So the trick for entrepreneurs is to think about, actually, how do I influence the people around me without so challenging them without them rejecting me, which is a trick which is all about impact and influence. Yep. It's all about saying, okay, how do I help them see the way? And to do that, you have to be in their shoes. You can't be in yours, because otherwise you're constantly pulling them or pushing them, and you have to make them seek you out. Mm-hmm. So a trick that I use a lot with aspiring leaders is to say, just spend a lot of time helping people achieve what they want to achieve. Because actually you'll have built sufficient credit in your account at some stage that you're going to be able to turn it around and say, now you help me out, or now you lead. So, if you go around being helpful, people will forget that you're challenging when you are challenging, and then they'll listen to you. And you're not helpful by telling people everything they're doing is wrong. You're helpful by giving them ideas to how they can do it better.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, because we had a previous guest, Professor Robert Walcott. He talked about building bridges and relationships well in advance of when you need them, which is a similar theme, and it's very good advice, actually. And if I think about some of the times where I've been successful, it's because of that, and where I haven't perhaps been as successful, it's because you take things for granted, or you think that because you've got a mandate from the top of the organization, that's enough to move people. But it's quite the opposite. It's actually a red rag to the bull. So yeah, no, it's very, very good advice. You also, just one of the other pieces I think that's interesting here is around the concept of co-creation. You talk about it in a couple of books. I mean, what does co-creation mean for you in some of your organizations? I mean, and is co-creation limited to within the four walls of the organization? Another guest we had is the CEO of DSM Nutrition's talked about very rarely would you have all the resources that you need within the four walls of your company. And therefore, you've got to be very good at collaborating and co-creating. And of course, your new book is titled Disciplined Collaboration. So what, where does co-creation fit into it? And what does disciplined collaboration actually mean?
It's interesting. You were speaking to somebody from DSM. I was with them only recently, and they certainly are good at reaching out outside their own organization. That's for sure. It's exactly what drove me to writing the last book, but also a couple of books ago. The idea that actually, for me, co-creation is about lack of boundaries, and a lot had been written about the boundaries inside the organization and how you can get over them. But part of the issue for me was, how do you connect the people who are outside your organization to your purpose? So actually, how do you get customers involved in your effort? How do you get suppliers involved in your effort? How do you build an ecosystem of ideas around your organization where people are not afraid to exchange? So for me, co-creation is very much away from the organizational mindset that says, how do we, cooperate better with marketing or whatever, to actually, how do we reach out and build communities of practice? And one of the things that I talk about in that space is this idea of real organizations rather than formal organizations. When you do that, you realize that actually customers are an inherent part of your organization. But the trouble is, you don't speak to them in a way that they can relate to. So there's a whole piece in co-creation, which is around, again, shared purpose, but also language, and helping people understand what is possible and what is not possible. And the idea of disciplined collaboration was very much to try to tackle some of the resistance to engage outside the organization. Part of the challenge of collaboration is a number of fears. And we have a lot of tools that people put together and say, well, if you follow these processes, you will have more collaboration. But what they never do is address the fundamental fears of collaboration, both at an organizational but also an individual level. And these fears are, simply there's four. One is, will I lose value? So if I give you my ideas, does that make me less valuable as a result? Could people want to speak to you rather than me? So I have a fear here, which is an individual one. Or as an organization, if I go out to suppliers and tell them what I'm working on, am I likely to see somebody coming up with the product before I do, for example? So there's that fear of loss of value. There's another fear, which is very prevalent in most organizations, which is the loss of quality. So actually, we always have a view that it will be better if I do it myself. If I get, people, I don't know if it's a shared saying, but people here in the UK say that a camel was a horse designed by a committee. Is the idea that when you involve people, you somehow lose quality. The other one, the big fear, I guess, for many is the fear of loss of momentum. So collaboration slows things down. And the final one for most leaders is complete lack of control. So actually, the very essence of collaboration is there is no defined outcome. We need to define it ourselves. So if that's the case, then who is in control of the outcome? And I think if you put those four fears together, then you have a recipe for disaster. So what I was trying to do with the book was saying, look, changing your structures won't help. Making friends won't help. If you really want to have collaboration, you're going to need to have a very disciplined approach to working through those fears. At an individual level, it's the realization that actually, collaboration is not the opposite of competition. It's just a different form of impact. It's a different form of power. So how do we evolve that power up that spectrum that goes from competition to collaboration, and in a very disciplined way, get rid of some of those fears that stand in the way? And if you think about, you mentioned DSM. If you think about places like this, inherently, without having read my book, they've managed to get rid of some of those fears at an organizational level, which enables them to then reach agreements with partners to co-develop and co-create and keep on time and put more resources one way or another to speed things up. So I think my only aim with the book was to say, look, a lot of that stuff is happening by default, but actually there's some ways in which you can make it happen quicker by being disciplined about how you approach collaboration.
Yeah, and I think the thing that struck me was, I mean, I haven't read the book because it hasn't been published. It's coming out in May, right?
Yeah, 12th of May.
12th of May. Is that you talk about the mindset, and again, it comes back to, what's the mindset of leaders, and how do you actually shift those mindsets to open up these new opportunities? Because if you hold on to the old mindset of scarcity and of control and of, quality, you're limiting yourself from the outset.
But yes, and I guess, back to what we were talking about for entrepreneurs, I think, the realization that actually those fears are very much alive in your leadership's head or heads. And the ability to say, well, okay, if I'm going to change things here, if I'm going to disrupt the status quo around here, then actually I have to prove that you don't have to be fearful. It's true of collaboration, but it's true of change generally. The things that will make people fear change, whatever shape it takes, are normally loss of either of those four things or all of those four things. And so if you have a plan to say, well, okay, I can do this, whilst at the same time maintaining momentum around delivery, I can do this while at the same time adding value, I can do this whilst giving you some form of control, then I think you're removing any excuses that people might have to reject your idea.
Yeah. Okay. So just changing gear and beginning to wrap up. I mean, do you have any? I mean, can you tell us, once you publish the book? I mean, tell us a little bit about your plans for the future, Emmanuel. Any other big projects that you're looking forward to rolling your sleeves up and getting into?
Well, there's a couple of things in the pipeline. There's a very exciting piece of work that I'm looking forward to do to help an organization connect with their customers and actually change away from being an engineering-driven organization to being a customer-driven one. So that's going to be good fun, and we're going to work with the leadership team there. I have a plan to research and write another book, which is in the pipeline. Slightly different, more about trying to look at all this leadership literature that you were talking about and saying, actually, what are the things you should really know? What are the things that really matter out of all of that? So we're preparing something for mainly for young managers as a kind of a dictionary of things they ought to know. Apart from that, the collaboration thing is being rolled out. We've got some diagnostics that we're preparing, some kind of online tools that we can give people to help them in the change they seek. So that's all coming together. It's all quite exciting. So yes, busy ahead.
Excellent. Okay, so let's just, I sent you 3 questions in advance, so let's just go towards those, if you don't mind. So firstly, what are your morning rituals?
I have very few. I tend not to like rituals because I think I'm in danger otherwise of doing the same thing over and over and over again. So I quite like a bit of disruption.
I think that's the point to them, isn't it?
but yeah, I mean, So I do read. So I do get up. I do catch the news very early on, and I will read at least 2 UK papers. I'll have a quick look in the US, quick look in Asia. So I try to read news from across the globe first thing in the morning. That's my only real ritual in the morning. I also have an evening ritual, which is that I will always make time at the end of the day to have a proper conversation with my wife and with my children. So I tend to ceremonially disconnect in the evening to make sure that we can have conversation. But apart from that, I try to keep myself energized by keeping on my toes.
And you travel a lot, so I mean, do those conversations happen electronically if you're not there?
Yes, every day. That will happen every day religiously. So
good for you.
And that's the joy of technology, I have to say.
Absolutely. Excellent. Second question, what have you changed your mind about recently?
No, that was tough. That was a tough one to do. I changed my mind a lot, and I changed my mind probably more often than I would like. I change my mind a lot around the things that I work on because I read a lot and I research a lot. So I always come up with, find new ideas and think, oh my goodness, that challenges a lot of what I think. The one thing that I'm changing my mind back and forth about, which is a very actual one. So you were asking about recently, is that entire debate on Europe. I have to say I am finding it increasingly difficult to get information, or at least data that I can turn into information on most of the topics that are impacting us here in the UK around which way people are going to vote. And I change my mind on some of the topics at hand quite often, and in a way that makes my head spin sometimes. I also do challenge my mind. So I tend to, I have a background in philosophy and logic. So I do tend to see arguments from every angle possible. And I may always make a point to try to, to change things around and see what happens. So I do change my mind a lot. But the whole Europe thing is probably the most recent one, where I'm going from one end of the spectrum to the other in search of data that has not been filtered through some political lens. And that's very difficult.
Yeah. Okay. And third question: what advice do you have for your 25-year-old self?
Don't worry so much. I think Dan Pink wrote at some stage some advice for young people, and he wrote something about the first thing you need to realize is there is no plan. And I think we're my 25-year-old self was very much driven by a sort of plan. And the idea that you had to do some of the things that you had to do, and the realization that actually it turns out to be okay even if you throw the plan away. But it took me a while to throw the plan away. So don't worry so much is the thing that I would say, and trust that you'll be okay if you do the right thing by other people, which is our hope and motto that works.
Yeah. Well, and you're not the first person. Several people have answered that question in exactly the same way, perhaps not as eloquently, but certainly it's a consistent answer to that question, which is fascinating. So where can people get in touch with you, Emmanuel?
Anywhere. So I'm all over social media. I guess Twitter is probably the one that is the easiest to get access to, and my Twitter name is Gobillot, so that's like Ego Billot, EGOBILLOT. And otherwise, I'm online. My email is Emmanuel@EmmanuelGobillot.com. The website is EmmanuelGobillot.com. Somehow you will find me.
We'll put it in the show notes, all these details.
But I am always more than happy for people to get in touch and get into a conversation. And I always make the promise I will never charge you for a call or an email or a conversation. So I'm not a lawyer or an accountant. I don't have a timesheet. So please do get in touch. I'm always fascinated with what people are trying to achieve. So it'll be a real pleasure to hear from some of your listeners. Well,
and also, as you said, the books are designed to start a conversation as well. So, yeah.
Absolutely. It was interesting. I was just talking to the publicist who are going to work with us on the book, and they said, how do you take reviews? How would you react to a bad review? And I thought, well, actually, there is never a bad review. I think a review of somebody who challenges your idea and said, well, actually, it doesn't work for me, is not a bad review. It's a very interesting review. So I'm always on the lookout for people who are going to share ideas, challenge ideas. So I always love to hear from people. So don't hesitate to get in touch.
Brilliant. Well, so Emmanuel, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you. I'm sure that our audience will find this talk as interesting and stimulating as I have. And thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for the opportunity. I very much appreciate it.
So I hope you found the discussion of interest. I like the way he looks at subjects from a fresh angle. For example, instead of focusing on the leader, he focuses on the follower. He recognises how important it is to help employees reconnect with the original purpose of an organisation, the reason the business was created in the first place, because this taps into a powerful source of energy within every human being. The importance of purpose in the workplace is a subject I will explore with an upcoming guest, Gerard Adams, co-founder of the Elite Daily, a media business known as the voice of Generation Y. Next week, Roddy talks to Stephen McGregor, the founder of Leadership Academy in Barcelona, who explains why executives and entrepreneurs need to manage their whole selves for sustainable high performance. Thanks again to Emmanuel. I'm really looking forward to his new book on collaboration. And in the meantime, head over to our website, www.innovationecosystem.net, all one word, where you can see the show notes, get a transcript, and sign up for our weekly updates. And if you like this episode, please do go to iTunes and write a review. These shows take time and energy to make, and we really would like to hear from you and to get our work out into the innovation ecosystem for executives and entrepreneurs alike to benefit from. Thanks again for your time and have a great week.